Nobody believed Sinachi when she told them what happened at the river that morning. Not her mother, not her grandmother, not even Chibugo, who was her closest friend in the world and who had believed her about everything for 17 years. Nobody believed her. And Sinachi understood why. Because if she had not been there herself, standing at the edge of the Orashi River with mud on her sandals and water still dripping from her hands, she would not have believed it either. She would have smiled the polite smile. The one young people smile when old people tell strange stories. She would have nodded and said, "Yes, Grandma. Yes, I hear you." And she would have believed nothing. But she had been there. She had seen it. She had felt it. The warmth on her palms where the old woman's hands had been. The smell of the river that had changed, just for a moment, from the usual smell of water and fish and wet earth, to something else entirely. Something ancient. Something that had no name in any language Sinachi knew. Something that smelled like the beginning of things. And the old woman. The old woman, she had helped carry her pot to the far bank of the river. The old woman whose eyes had been the wrong color. The old woman who had thanked her, and then had not walked away, had not waded back through the water, had not gone into the trees on the other side, had simply stopped being there, like smoke when the wind decides, like a reflection when the water stills, like something that had never been solid, just gone. And in the place where she had been standing, on the far bank of the Orashi, with the morning sun just beginning to touch the water, there was nothing. No footprints, no displaced earth, no bent grass where an old woman's weight should have pressed. Just the bank, just the river, just Sinachi, standing on the other side, heart hammering, hands warm, with the absolute, bone-deep, life-rearranging certainty that the world was not the size she had always thought it was. If your spirit moved just now, if something in that opening reached into you and touched something old, then hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel right now because what we carry here are the stories that live underneath the ordinary world. The stories your great-grandmother knew. The ones told by firelight in languages that are older than the roads we walk on. Hit subscribe and drop in the comments where you are watching from tonight. Wherever you are in this world, we want to know your name. We are building something here, and you belong in it. Now, let us go all the way back, because this story does not begin at the river. It begins 3 months before the river. It begins in a compound in the village of Oguta in Imo State. And it begins with grief. Oguta was a lake village, but the Orashi River ran close to it. Close enough that the village women went there for water when the lake was high with rains that made the water taste of things it should not taste of. Oguta was known for its lake. The Oguta Lake, wide and beautiful and moody, changing color with the sky, surrounded by trees that curved over it like they were trying to see their own reflections. The people of Oguta had a relationship with water the way some families have relationships with difficult relatives, deeply, unavoidably, with great love and great wariness and the permanent awareness that the water could give and the water could take, and it had its own ideas about which it would do at any given moment. They had stories about the water, old stories, the kind that the grandmothers carried. About the things that lived in the deep parts, about the woman who appeared at the crossing, about what it meant if the water went still when it should have been moving. The young people of Oguta heard these stories, the way all young people hear old stories, with their ears but not their full hearts. One particular young woman was about to hear them with everything she had, whether she was ready or not. Her name was Sinachi Obi. Her full name was Sinakimso Obi, which meant, God knows my heart. Her mother had chosen that name on the 3rd day after Sinachi was born, after a very hard delivery that had frightened everyone in the room, because the name felt like both a prayer and a defiance. A declaration. Whatever anyone else sees or thinks or judges, God knows what is inside this child. Sinachi had grown into a name that suited her. She was 17. She was the kind of girl who felt things deeply and tried very hard not to show it. Not because she was ashamed of feeling deeply, but because she had learned early that when you show people how much something matters to you, they have power over you. And Sinachi had spent most of her life trying to give people as little power over her as possible. This was not coldness. It was armor. And armor, when you have needed it long enough, starts to feel like skin. She lived in Oguta with her mother, Adiz, not the Adiz from other stories, but her own Adiz, a seamstress who worked from a small room in their compound and whose sewing machine was the soundtrack of Sinachi's entire childhood, that steady rhythm, like a metal heartbeat, like the sound of someone building something out of cloth and patience. Her father was not there. He had been not there since Sinachi was 4 years old. She did not remember his face clearly. Only impressions. A large hand. A particular smell. The sound of laughter that was bigger than the room. Her mother never spoke badly of him. She also rarely spoke of him at all. Which told Sinachi, when she was old enough to read silences, everything she needed to know about what had happened. Her grandmother, Mama Chitty, everyone called her that. Even people who were not her grandchildren, lived in the back room of the compound. Mama Chitty was 74 years old. She was small. She had been shrinking for years, Sinachi thought, the way very old people sometimes shrink, like time was slowly returning them to the earth. But her mind was enormous, wide and deep and full of things, full of stories, full of proverbs that arrived from her lips at exactly the right moment, like she had a filing system inside her that tracked every situation and retrieved the appropriate wisdom without effort. Full of the old knowledge, the knowledge that came before books, the knowledge that lived in the body and in the blood and in the careful observation of things that most people walked past without seeing. Mama Chitty was the only person who believed Sinachi. Later, when the story came out, Mama Chitty was the only one who did not smile, who did not offer a gentle explanation, who sat very still and looked at her granddaughter with eyes that had seen enough of the world to recognize when the world had just revealed something rare. But that comes later. First, the grief. The grief began on a Tuesday in October. The school term had just started. Sinachi was in her final year of secondary school. She had plans. Big plans. The kind of plans that keep you moving forward through difficulty because the forward is always there, always lit up and waiting. She wanted to study medicine. She had wanted this since she was 11 years old and had watched a doctor at the general hospital explain her grandmother's blood pressure medication with such clarity and such kindness that Sinachi had thought, I want to be that. That kind of clear. That kind of useful. Her grades were good enough. Her mother worked hard enough. Everything was aligning. And then the Tuesday came. Her mother came to her school, which had never happened before. Sinachi saw her through the window of the classroom, standing at the gate, still wearing her work clothes, the loose Ankara top she wore when she was sewing, with a small measuring tape still hooked into the pocket. Still. She was standing very still. Sinachi's chest understood before her mind did. She raised her hand and asked to be excused. She went to the gate. Her mother looked at her. Adiz had a face that was usually moving, usually in the middle of some expression, usually tracking something, usually alive with whatever she was thinking. That Tuesday her face was not moving. It had gone to a place beyond expression. She said, Sinachi, it is Mama Chitty. A stroke. The doctors used that word. A stroke. Sinachi had heard it before. She knew what it meant technically. What she had not known, what no technical definition had prepared her for, was what it looked like. What it looked like to walk into a hospital room and see someone you love made small by a bed, made quiet by tubes and beeping machines, made unfamiliar by the absence of everything that made them themselves. Mama Chitty, who had never been quiet in her life, who had a story for every occasion and a proverb for every silence, lay in that bed with her eyes closed and her breathing slow and mechanical and her hands folded in a way that felt wrong. Too still, too arranged, not the way Mama Chitty's hands ever rested. Sinachi stood at the bedside. She held her grandmother's hand. She said nothing, because everything she might have said, "Come back, don't leave, I need you, you cannot go," felt too small for the situation, too inadequate, like trying to hold back the river with your hands. Mama Chitty did not die. She came back, slowly, unevenly, the way stroke survivors sometimes come back, pieces returning at different speeds, some pieces returning almost whole, some coming back altered, some not coming back at all. Her speech came back first, slow and effortful, each word a small battle, but there. Her recognition came back quickly. She knew everyone, knew where she was, knew what had happened. Her right side was weaker. Her balance was unreliable. She needed help to walk. She came home from the hospital after 2 weeks. She came home to the back room of the compound, and the compound reorganized itself around her the way a family reorganizes when something important changes. Sinachi reorganized. She woke earlier. She did more. She sat with Mama Chitty in the evenings after her homework was done. She learned what the old woman needed and provided it the way she did most things, quietly, without performance, without waiting to be asked twice. But here is what nobody saw. Nobody saw the cost. Because Sinachi did not show the cost. The armor. The armor looked like competence. Like handling everything. Like being fine. But underneath, she was terrified. She was terrified of losing her grandmother. She was terrified of what losing Mama Chitty would mean for the balance of the world she had built. Because Mama Chitty was not just an old woman in the back room. Mama Chitty was the person who had always known, who had always seen through the armor, who had always said exactly the right thing at exactly the right time without Sinachi ever having to explain herself. Mama Chitty was the one person in the world who knew her, fully, without effort, without demand, and the thought of a world without that. Sinachi could not think it to completion. She stopped it every time. She pushed it back. She went back to doing the next thing. The morning water. The evening medicine. The homework. The next step. Always the next step. Because stopping would mean feeling it. And feeling it was not something she had time for. 3 months after Mama Chitty came home from the hospital, Sinachi went to the river. It was her mother's idea. Not literally her idea. But Adiz had mentioned twice, in that careful, quiet way she had of mentioning things she considered important, that the large water pot in the kitchen was cracking and they needed to fill the smaller ones from the river before the cracking became a full break. The normal water supply had been difficult that week. A pipe issue somewhere in the village system. The Orashi River was the practical alternative. Sinachi volunteered. She often did the river run when it was needed. She liked the walk. Even in difficulty, even carrying things, even in grief. She had always liked the walk to the Orashi. Something about moving toward water calmed her. The way the air changed as you got close. The sound of it before you saw it. The specific quality of the light near moving water. She left in the early morning, just after 6. The sun was up, but not fully committed yet. The air was cool. She carried 2 medium containers. She walked the familiar path from their compound through the back road of Oguta, past the 3 mango trees that marked the edge of the residential area, down the slope where the red earth turned soft and the grass grew taller, through the fringe of trees that the river had been growing for centuries, and then the bank appeared. Wide and familiar. The Orashi, moving. Always moving. She was filling the second container when she heard it. A sound. From the path behind her. She turned. The old woman was coming down the slope. Slowly, very slowly. Her body bent forward as if she was fighting a strong wind, except there was no wind. She was carrying something on her head, a clay water pot, old and dark and large. Too large for a woman her size. Too large for a woman her age. Too large, honestly, for most people. Sinachi watched her come. She was perhaps 70 meters away, coming toward the bank. Sinachi turned back to her container. She kept filling it. She had things to do. She had to get back. Her mother would need to leave for her first sewing client by 7:30. Mama Chitty would need her morning medicine at 8. She had school. She had things. She kept filling the container. And then, from the path, a sound. A soft, exhausted sound. Not a cry. Not a shout. Just a sound. The sound of someone who is at the edge of what they can carry. Sinachi stopped. She looked up. The old woman had stopped walking. She was standing on the path, perhaps 40 meters from the bank now, with the enormous clay pot on her head and her legs shaking, visibly shaking, and her hands raised to steady the pot, and her whole body doing the difficult mathematics of staying upright. Sinachi looked at her. She looked at her containers. One full, one almost full. She looked back at the old woman. She set the container down. She walked up the bank. She walked up the path. She reached the woman. She said, in Igbo, "Mama, let me help you." This is where it began. This exact moment. This small decision. Made without thinking. Made without calculating. Made simply because a person was struggling and Sinachi's feet had already started moving before her mind had the chance to weigh the inconvenience. The old woman looked at her, and this was the first thing Sinachi noticed that was wrong. Not wrong in a frightening way. Wrong in the way that a note in a song is wrong when it is pitched too perfectly, when the voice is so accurate it stops sounding human and starts sounding like something else. The old woman's eyes were the color of the river behind them. Not brown, not dark. The exact gray-green of the Orashi River on a morning like this one. Moving. Like water. The irises of her eyes were moving. Like water. Sinachi's breath caught. She covered it. She said, "I'll take the pot. Can you walk to the bank?" The old woman said, in a voice like river stones moving, "I can walk to the bank." She said it with absolute certainty. The certainty of someone who has been walking to this bank since before the bank had a name. Sinachi raised her hands. She reached for the pot, and when her hands touched it, she stopped. The pot was warm. Not the warmth of ceramic that has been sitting in morning sun. The warmth of something alive. Something breathing. A warmth that moved into her palms and up her arms and into her chest like the first sip of hot tea on a cold morning. She felt something shift in her. Like a room that has been locked for a long time and someone has just found the key. Not dramatically. Not explosively. Just open. She took the pot. She steadied it on her own head. And she walked down the bank with the old woman beside her. The pot was not heavy. This was the second wrong thing. A clay pot that size, with water or oil or anything real inside it, should have been impossible for Sinachi to carry without help. Should have buckled her knees. Should have required at least 2 strong people. But it sat on her head like an empty bowl. Like nothing. Like it weighed exactly the same as it did when it had nothing inside it. Sinachi thought, maybe it is empty. But it was not empty. She could feel something moving inside it. Not sloshing. Not the movement of liquid. Something else. Something that moved with purpose. Like something alive. Like something that knew it was being carried. She did not look inside. Something told her not to look inside. The same something that had started her feet moving before her mind agreed. She carried the pot. The old woman walked beside her. Down to the bank. To the edge of the water. They stood at the river. Sinachi lowered the pot carefully from her head. She set it on the ground at the bank's edge. She straightened up. She looked at the old woman. The old woman was looking at the river. Looking at it the way people look at something they own. The way you look at your own compound. Your own room. The place that is yours. Sinachi said, "Mama, where do you need to go?" "Across." The old woman said, still looking at the river. "Yes. To the other side." Sinachi looked at the river. The Orashi was not particularly wide at this point. Perhaps 15 meters. But the water was moving faster than usual this morning. She had noticed it when she was filling her containers. The level was up. The current was stronger. The stepping stones that usually broke the surface were completely submerged. Crossing alone would be difficult. Crossing alone with a heavy pot would be dangerous. She said, "I'll help you cross." The old woman turned. She looked at Sinachi. That look. The one that would not leave Sinachi's memory for the rest of her life. Those river-colored eyes moving like river water. Looking at Sinachi the way something ancient looks at something it has been waiting for. She said, "You would cross with me?" "It is not a simple crossing this morning." Sinachi said, "I can see that." The old woman said, "You have your own containers to fill, your own morning to manage, your own family waiting." Sinachi looked at her for a moment. She said, "Yes. And you have a pot to carry to the other side." Something moved across the old woman's face. Something vast. Something that was not quite a smile, but was the ancestor of all smiles. She said, "Come, my daughter." They crossed. Sinachi held the pot on her head. She held her free hand out to the old woman. The old woman took it. Her hand was dry. Warm. So warm. Warmer than any human hand Sinachi had ever held. Warmer than made sense. Warmer than the morning. Warmer than the air. Warmer than even the strange warmth of the pot. Warmer like something that generates heat from inside. Like something that is always burning. The water came to Sinachi's knees at the deepest point. It was cold. River cold. But the warmth from the old woman's hand traveled down through their joined grip, and somehow, impossibly, inexplicably, the cold was less. She crossed, testing each step, feeling the river bottom with her feet. Slow, steady, one step, another. The old woman moved beside her with a steadiness that had not been on the path. On the path she had been bent and shaking. In the water she was different. In the water she was entirely still. Like the water was not resisting her. Like the water was helping her. Like she and the water were the same kind of thing and were simply moving together. Sinachi noticed this. She filed it in the part of her mind where she kept things she did not yet have words for. They reached the other side. Sinachi stepped onto the far bank. She lowered the pot from her head. She set it down. She let go of the old woman's hand. She turned. She looked at the old woman. The old woman was different. She was standing straight. Not bent. Not shaking. Not struggling with anything. Standing straight. With a height and a stillness that did not belong to a frail old woman on a river path. And her eyes were fully the river now. Not like the river. Not river-colored. The river, moving inside her face. Gray-green and alive and ancient, and moving. Sinachi felt the world tilt. Not physically. The ground was solid. The world tilted inside her. The way it tilts when you realize that something you thought was one size is actually much larger. Like standing in a field at night and looking up and suddenly understanding, truly understanding, how many stars there are. That tilting. She did not run. Her body did not run. She stood on that far bank with mud on her knees and water dripping from her wrapper and a river-eyed woman standing before her. And she waited. Because something in her, some deep, old, inherited thing that lived below her thoughts, knew that whatever was about to happen was not something you ran from. It was something you stood for. The old woman, the being, spoke. She spoke in Igbo. Old Igbo. The kind that Mama Chitty used sometimes. The kind that sounded like the language before the language. like the words were older than the words. She said, I have stood at this river since before your people came to build near it. I have crossed this water 10,000 times. I have asked for help at this bank in every season that has passed. Some people help because they are afraid of rivers and afraid of old women and afraid of what refusing might mean. Some people help because they want something back. Some people help because they are watched. But you looked at me and your feet moved. There was no calculation. There was no pause for thinking. There was only, this person needs help and I am here. That is the rarest thing. In all my years, in all my crossings, that pure, unthinking, uncalculating movement toward another person's need, that is the rarest thing. And I have seen it in you before. This morning, but also before this morning. I know you, Sinachi Obi. I know your heart. And your heart is what it was named. God knows my heart. Sinakimso. The being said it without saying it. But Sinachi heard it inside her chest where names live. The being said, you are afraid. Sinachi opened her mouth. The being said, not of me. Of losing her. Sinachi's throat closed. The being said, the grandmother. One word. 2 syllables. And Sinachi, who had been holding everything together for 3 months with the sheer force of staying busy and staying moving and staying useful, Sinachi's eyes filled. She did not cry. She held it. But her eyes filled. And the being saw. Of course the being saw. The being who had been watching this river and this world for longer than anyone could count. She saw everything. The being reached into the pot. Not into the opening at the top. Into the side. Through the clay. The way you might reach through still water. Her hand went in. It came back out. She was holding something. She walked to Sinachi. She held it out. Sinachi looked at her open palm. There was water in it. Just water. A small pool of water. Cupped in the being's dry, warm hand. Not dripping. Not spilling. Held. As if the water knew it was being held and chose to stay. The being said, this water is from the deep source. The place beneath the riverbed where the water does not move. Where it has been since before the rains had names. This water is older than illness. It knows what the body is supposed to be. Sinachi stared at the water. The being said, take it home to her. Let her drink it. All of it. Before the sun reaches the top of the sky. Not tomorrow. Today. Sinachi said, and her voice was barely there. My grandmother. The being said, the one you are afraid of losing. Sinachi said, will it? She stopped. Will she? The being looked at her. Those moving, river-deep eyes. She said, I cannot promise you what the water does. The water knows what it knows. What I can tell you is that the water does not lie. And the water does not come to people who have not earned it. She paused. She said, you have earned it. Sinachi reached out. Her hand was shaking. She cupped her palm beneath the being's. The water transferred into her hands. And when it landed in her palms, it was warm. Warmer than the woman's hand. Warmer than the pot. Warmer than anything that was not a living thing had a right to be. And it moved in her palms. Moved like it was thinking. Like it was alive. Like it had somewhere it needed to go and was waiting for her to carry it there. She looked up. The being was gone. And this time she truly saw the absence. Not the absence of someone who walked away. The absence of something that had simply chosen to stop being visible. The air where she had been standing was ordinary air. The bank where she had been standing showed no footprints. The pot, the enormous clay pot that Sinachi had carried on her head across the Orashi River, was gone. Sinachi stood on the far bank with warm, ancient water cupped in her hands. She looked at the river. The river moved. Gray-green. Ancient. As if nothing had happened. As if everything had happened. She looked at the water in her hands. She thought, how do I carry this back? The water moved in her palms. It swirled once, slowly. Like it was showing her something. Like it was telling her, trust. And then, she did not understand how. The water gathered itself into a small, contained pool, and it stayed. It did not run through her fingers. It held together, as if held by something invisible, as if it had decided to stay in her hands until it reached where it needed to go. Sinachi crossed back into the river, knee-deep, cold, with her hands cupped in front of her and the warm, ancient water sitting in them like a secret. She crossed back to her side. She walked up the bank. She looked at her 2 water containers, filled, waiting. She looked at her hands. The water was still there, still warm, still moving slowly. She picked up her containers with her elbows somehow, which should not have worked, but did, and she started home. She walked fast, faster than she usually walked, not running, but with urgency, with purpose, with the particular focus of someone who has been given something precious and is not going to drop it. She came through the gate. Her mother was in the sewing room. The machine was going, that familiar metal heartbeat. It stopped when she heard the gate. Adiz came to the door. She looked at Sinachi. She took in the wet wrapper, the mud on her knees, the expression on Sinachi's face. She said, "What happened?" Sinachi said, "Where is Mama Chitty?" Adiz said, "Still sleeping." Sinachi, what? Sinachi went past her. She went to the back room. She pushed the door gently. Mama Chitty was awake. She was lying in her bed with her eyes open, looking at the ceiling with the particular look she had since coming home from the hospital. The look of someone who had been shown how close the edge was and was now very conscious of standing near it. She turned when the door opened. She looked at Sinachi, and immediately, something changed in her face. Not surprise, recognition. The old woman's eyes went to Sinachi's cupped hands, and she went very still. The way you go still when you see something you thought only existed in the old stories. She said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Sinachi, what do you have there?" Sinachi came to the bedside. She sat. She looked at her grandmother. She said, "I met someone at the river." Mama Chitty said, "Tell me." Sinachi said, "She was old. She needed help with her pot. I helped her cross." Mama Chitty closed her eyes for one moment. "Open them," she said, her eyes. Sinachi said, "Like the river." Mama Chitty made a sound that had no language, something between a sob and a prayer and the most ancient kind of laughter. She said, "And she gave you water." Not a question. Sinachi said, "Yes." Mama Chitty looked at the cupped hands. She said, "From the deep source." Sinachi's breath caught. She said, "How do you know?" "Because my own grandmother told me," Mama Chitty said. "Because her grandmother told her. Because it is one of the oldest stories in this family. That the river comes. That it tests. That it gives." She looked at Sinachi. "But only to those who deserve it. Only to the ones whose hearts are what they seem." Sinachi stared at her grandmother. Mama Chitty said, "How much water?" Sinachi looked at her hands. The pool of warm water in her cupped palms. She said, "Not much. Not a lot. Just all of it," Mama Chitty said. "She told you all of it." "Yes." Her grandmother reached out with her weaker right hand. It trembled slightly, but it reached. She took Sinachi's hands in hers. She looked at the water, and she lowered her face, and she drank. Sinachi knelt beside the bed. Her hands were steady. She held them still while her grandmother drank the water from her palms. It took a long time, much longer than the amount of water should have taken. Because the water kept replenishing itself, Sinachi felt it, quietly, steadily, filling her palms back as her grandmother drank it down. Like the deep source was not in the river. Like the deep source was in the carrying. In the hands that had helped. In the heart behind the hands. Mama Chitty drank. And drank. And drank. Until she lifted her face. Until she sat back. Her eyes were wet. And something else. They were clearer. Clearer than they had been in 3 months. clearer than they had been since the stroke. Like a window that had been fogged and suddenly, briefly, was wiped clean. She looked at Sinachi. She said, "I feel it." Sinachi said, "What does it feel like?" Mama Chitty thought about it. She said, "Like being remembered by something that forgot nothing." What happened next happened slowly. Not the way stories sometimes present miraculous things, suddenly, dramatically, all at once. It happened the way real things happen. Over days. Over weeks. Piece by piece. Mama Chitty slept for the rest of that day. Slept deeply. The sleep of something being repaired at a level below the surface. When she woke in the evening, Sinachi was there. Her mother was there. They looked at her. She said, "I'm hungry." She had not said that. Not in that direct, certain way, since before the hospital. Adiz went to cook. Mama Chitty sat up in her bed with a steadiness that had not been there that morning. She held the cup of water Sinachi brought her with her right hand. The hand that had been weak. She held it with both hands. But the right hand did not shake. Sinachi watched her grandmother hold that cup. Watched the trembling not come. And she breathed. For the first time in 3 months. She breathed all the way in. All the way. Without the tightness. Without the grip. Without the terror of what comes next. Just breathed. And something in the breathing was like the crossing. Like reaching the other side. In the days that followed, Sinachi noticed things. Small things. Mama Chitty's speech, which had been slow and labored, began to find its rhythm again. The words came easier. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But easier. The right side, which had been weak, began to respond more reliably. The balance improved. Slowly. Incrementally. The way a tide comes in. One wave at a time. But coming. The doctors were pleased. More than pleased. Her physiotherapist, a young man from the town who came 3 times a week and who had been cautiously optimistic from the beginning, was genuinely astonished at the progress in the 3rd week after the river morning. He said, "Mrs. Chitty, this is remarkable. Whatever you have been doing, keep doing it." Mama Chitty looked at Sinachi across the room. She said, "I have been remembering things." Sinachi said nothing, but she felt the warmth in her palms again, like a memory the body keeps, like water that stays. Sinachi told no one for a long time. Not the river part, not the being, not what had happened on the far bank. She told it to Chibugo first. Chibugo, who was her closest friend, who had known her since primary 2, who shared her lunch and her secrets and her complaints about teachers and her dreams. Chibugo listened, carefully, all the way through. When Sinachi finished, Chibugo was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The eyes were moving? Like actually moving?" Sinachi said, "Like the river." Chibugo said, "And the pot disappeared?" "Yes." "And the water stayed in your hands without spilling?" "Yes." Chibugo looked at her. She said, "Sinachi, I believe you." Sinachi stared at her. She said, "You do?" Chibugo said, "I believe you because I know you. And you don't make things up. You've never made things up. You are the most literal person I know. If you said the sky was pink, I would go look at the sky." She paused. "Also, your grandmother is walking without the wall for support now. Something happened. Something happened. The simplest possible way to put it. Something happened." Sinachi said, "Do you think I should tell my mother?" Chibugo thought about it. She said, "Your mother would want to explain it. She would find a reason. She loves reasons." Sinachi smiled. A real smile. Her first full one in a long time. She said, "And Mama Chitty?" Chibugo said, "Your grandmother already knows." Sinachi said, "She does. She told me it was one of the oldest stories in her family." Chibugo said, "Then it goes back far. Very far." A pause. Chibugo said, "Sinachi, why you? Why did she choose you?" Sinachi thought about it. She thought about the being's words. That pure, unthinking, uncalculating movement toward another person's need. She said, I don't think she chose me exactly. I think she came and gave the situation, and I responded the way I responded. And the response was the test. Chibugo said, and other people have failed it. Other people have walked past. Yes. But you stopped. Sinachi was quiet. She said, I stopped because she was struggling. I didn't think about anything else. I just stopped. Chibugo looked at her for a long time. She said, You know what I think is the strangest part of this story? Sinachi said, What? She said, That the most supernatural thing that has ever happened in this village happened to the most unsupernatural person I know. The most practical. The most down-to-earth. You. Sinachi said, Maybe that is exactly why. She told her mother eventually. 3 weeks after the morning at the river. She waited until Mama Chitty was sitting in the compound. Actually sitting outside, in the compound, in the afternoon sun, for the first time since the hospital. She waited until her mother had sat beside the old woman, and the three of them were together. She told it. All of it. The path. The old woman on it. The pot. The crossing. The being. The water. Adiz listened. Adiz who loved reasons. Adiz who was practical in the way of women who have had to be practical because no one else was going to be. She listened, and her face was still. When Sinachi finished, her mother looked at Mama Chitty. She said, Did you know? Mama Chitty said, I told you the river gives. Adiz said, You told me the stories. And Adiz was quiet for a long time. She looked at her mother. At the way Mama Chitty was sitting in the afternoon sun with her back straight. At the way her right hand was resting on her knee without trembling. At the eyes that were clear. At the woman who, 2 months ago, had been in a hospital bed looking like someone being slowly returned to the earth. And was now here. Present. Whole. Or more whole than she had been. Adiz said, The stories are true. Not a question. Mama Chitty said, The stories are always true. Adiz looked at her daughter. Sinachi braced herself. For the explanation. For the gentle but persistent rationalization. For the question of whether she had perhaps had too much sun that morning, or whether the water she thought she carried had simply been her own cupped hands, or whether. Adiz said, Thank you. That was all. Thank you. Sinachi stared at her mother. Adiz's eyes were wet. She said, Thank you for stopping. Thank you for crossing. Thank you for holding that water all the way home. And then she did something she had not done in years. She put her arms around her daughter. She held her. Right there in the compound. In the afternoon sun. Held her without any words. Without explanation. Without reason. Just held her. And Sinachi, who had been wearing armor for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to have it off, let herself be held. Let herself be a daughter. Not the one who handled things. Not the one who was fine. Just the daughter. Small and tired and scared and grateful and deeply, profoundly loved. She went back to the river. Not the next morning. Not for a while. She went back when Mama Chitty asked her to. A month after the water morning. Mama Chitty said, I want to come with you. Sinachi said, Mama, the path. I can walk the path. Sinachi looked at her grandmother. She could walk the path. That was the thing. She could. Not easily. Not quickly. But she could walk it. She said, Okay, Mama. We'll walk it together. They went in the morning. Slowly. The two of them. Through the village road. Past the 3 mango trees. Down the red earth slope. Through the fringe of trees. To the bank. Mama Chitty stopped at the edge of the water. She looked at the river. She looked at it for a very long time. With those clear eyes. With the expression of someone seeing something beloved after a long time away. Sinachi stood beside her. She did not hurry her. She did not fill the silence. She simply stood. The way the being had stood. The way the river stood. Patient. Present. Eventually Mama Chitty said, I came to this river for the first time when I was 7 years old. My own mother brought me. It was the dry season and the water was low and I could see all the way to the bottom. Sinachi said nothing. Mama Chitty said, she told me, this river is alive, Chitty. Not like the fish. Not like us. Like something that was here before. Like something that will be hereafter. And if you are ever good, if you are ever truly good, in the way that costs you something, the river will know. She paused. She said, I tried to be good. I tried for 74 years to be the kind of person the river would know. She looked at Sinachi. She said, and then you came along. And you stopped on a path for an old woman with a heavy pot. And the river sent what it sent. And now look at me. Sinachi said, you were already the kind of person the river knew, Mama. Mama Chitty looked at her. She said, maybe. But I was not the kind of person who earned the water. Not this time. You were. She reached out. She took Sinachi's hand. She held it. Warm to warm. Grandmother to granddaughter. Old knowledge to young courage. She said, whatever the river gave me, it gave me through you. Through your hands. Through your heart. Do you understand what that means? Sinachi said, I think so. Mama Chitty said, it means you carry something now. Not just from this morning. You carry this in your blood. This quality. This stopping. This crossing. This carrying of heavy things without being asked. It is in you. She paused. She said, don't let the world teach it out of you. The world will try. The world will show you reasons to walk past. It will show you that most people walk past and nothing bad happens to them. It will show you that stopping costs you time, costs you comfort, costs you energy you needed for other things. She squeezed Sinachi's hand. She said, let it cost you. Every time. Let it cost you and stop anyway. Because some costs are not costs. Some costs are the price of being a person the river is glad to remember. They stood at the bank until the morning had fully arrived. Until the sun was on the water and the river was bright and moving and ordinary and everything. They stood until Mama Chitty was ready to go back. Then they walked back. Slowly. Together. Two people who had both been to the edge of something vast and had both, in their own way, been kept from falling in. The months after the river were different. Not because everything became easy. Not because the grief disappeared or the fear went away or the difficulty of their lives resolved itself. Nothing resolves cleanly. Life is not clean in that way. But the months were different because something in Sinachi had changed. Something had opened in the crossing. Some door she had not known was closed. She still woke early. She still fetched water. She still helped with Mama Chitty and with the compound and with the things that needed doing. But she did it differently. Not from fear. Not from the desperate energy of someone running from the thought of losing something. From something calmer. From something that had been to the edge and come back and knew. With the certainty that only comes from standing on a far bank and watching an impossible thing disappear. That the world was larger and older and more full of something worth calling holy than she had ever let herself believe. Her WAC examinations came. She sat them. She sat them with a focus she had not expected to find. Not the frantic focus of someone fighting for their future. The steady focus of someone who knew their work and was simply doing it. She did well. Better than she had projected. She got her results. She qualified. She would study medicine. She would become the thing she had decided she wanted to be. When the results came, she sat in the compound and held the paper and thought about the doctor at the general hospital who had explained the blood pressure medication with clarity and kindness. She thought about what it meant to be that kind of useful. She thought about the being at the river. About what the being had said. That pure, unthinking, uncalculating movement toward another person's need. That was what she was training toward. The ability to move toward people who needed help with the same instinct she had moved toward the old woman on the path. Not because someone was watching. Not because there would be reward. Because the person was there, and she was there, and that was enough. That had always been enough. Mama Chitty continued to improve. Not to the woman she had been at 70. Not completely. The stroke had taken things that water, even ancient water, could not return. But she improved. She sat in the compound. She told stories. She argued with the neighbors about politics and weather and the proper way to prepare oaf aqua. She held court with the grandchildren of people who came to visit, telling them the old stories in the old way, with the old Igbo and the proverbs and the pauses that were as important as the words. She was not returned to exactly who she had been. She was something else. Something that had gone to the edge and come back with a different quality. A clarity. A presence. Like she was no longer taking any of it for granted. Not the compound. Not the afternoon sun. Not a Dee's sewing machine sound. Not Sinachi's face at the door each morning. She received it all. With both hands. Like water in the palms. Careful. Grateful. Not spilling a drop. There was one more thing. One thing that Sinachi did not tell anyone. Not Chibugo. Not her mother. Not Mama Chitty. She kept this one thing in the deep part of herself where the things that are most true tend to live. On the night after the river morning, after everyone was asleep and the compound was dark and quiet, she had gone to the window of her room and looked out at the path that led to the river. She had not gone to look at anything specific, just to look at the night. The way she did sometimes when her thoughts were too large for her room. And as she stood at the window, the night breeze came through. Warm. Too warm for the hour. Warmer than any breeze had a right to be. It moved through the window and past her face and into the room. And it smelled like the beginning of things. Like the smell she had caught at the river. The smell with no name. The smell of something ancient. She had stood very still at the window. She had breathed it in. And she had heard something. Not a voice. Not words. Just a sound. The sound the river makes when it is moving. From far away. Close enough to be a whisper. Far enough to be a dream. She had listened. And in the listening, in the moving river sound that should not have been able to reach their compound from that distance, she had felt it. Felt what she had felt in the morning when the water sat in her palms. The warmth of being held. The warmth of being recognized. The warmth of being known. And she understood something. She understood that the water had not just been a gift for her grandmother. The water had been a message. For her. A message that said, I see you. A message that said, your stopping has not been invisible. Your carrying has not gone unnoticed. All the mornings you have risen early. All the times you have swallowed your fear to be present for someone else. All the times you have moved toward a need when moving toward comfort would have been easier. All of it. I see it. The river had been watching her. Not just on the morning of the crossing. Always. The way it watches everyone. And on that morning, she had simply walked close enough for the river to reach out and touch her. She had been close enough because she had stopped. She had stopped because she was who she was. And who she was what the river had been waiting for. She stood at the window until the warm breeze passed. Until the river sound faded back to silence. Until the night was ordinary again. And then she went to bed. And she slept. Deeply. Without the grip. Without the tightness. Without the fear of what came next. Just slept. And in the sleep was the river. Moving. Gray-green. Ancient. Carrying her the way rivers carry things. Gently. Steadily. All the way through. Years passed. Sinachi went to university. She studied medicine. She was a good student in the way she had always been good at things. Not competitive, not dramatic, just thorough. She came back to Oguta in the holidays. She fetched water from the Orashi when she was home. She always went to the bank. She always looked at the crossing point. She never saw the old woman again. She had not expected to. The river had given what it came to give. The test had been given. The water had been carried. The gift had been delivered. The rest was hers to live with. And she lived with it well. She became a doctor. The kind that explains things with clarity and kindness. The kind that moves toward the person in the bed, not away. The kind that stops when everyone else is walking. She stopped. Every time. In ward rounds when a patient looked frightened. In corridors when a colleague was quietly struggling. In the streets outside the hospital when someone was confused or lost, or carrying something too heavy alone. She stopped. It cost her things sometimes. Time, comfort, energy she needed for other things. She let it cost. Every time. Because Mama Chitty had told her. Some costs are not costs. Mama Chitty lived to 81. She died at home. In the back room of the compound. In her bed. With the D's on one side and Sinachi on the other. She died in the morning. Just after sunrise. When the light was the particular quality of light that it is at the beginning of things. Her last clear sentence. And she had many sentences in her last days, because the speech had largely come back and spoken until nearly the end. Her last clear sentence was, "Tell them the river is alive." She said it to Sinachi, looking at her with those clear, old eyes. Sinachi said, "I'll tell them, Mama." Mama Chitty said, "Tell them it is watching." Sinachi said, "I'll tell them." Mama Chitty closed her eyes. She breathed slowly. 3 more times. And then she was done. And the room was quiet in the way rooms are quiet when something enormous has just left them. Sinachi stood at the window of the back room. She looked at the morning. The light coming up over the roofs of Oguta. Over the trees. Over the path that led down to the river. She thought about a morning 17 years earlier. A cold harmattan morning. A red earth slope. An old woman on a path. A pot that was too heavy. And a girl whose feet had moved before her mind agreed. She thought about the crossing. About the water. About the warmth on her palms that had never entirely left. She pressed her hands together. Right palm to left palm. She felt it. Still there. Like a memory the body keeps better than the mind. Like water that chose to stay. She breathed in. The morning air of Oguta. The ordinary, beloved, irreplaceable morning air of the place she came from. She breathed it all the way in. And she thought, I am the kind of person the river is glad to remember. Not because of anything the river gave her. Not because of the water or the miracle or the grandmother restored. Because of the morning. The ordinary morning before anything happened. When she had simply set down her container. And walked up the bank. And said, Mama, let me help you. That was enough. That had always been enough. That would always be enough. The river runs. It has always run. It will always run. Long after the names of everyone in this story have faded from the mouths of those who spoke them. Long after the compounds are returned to earth. Long after the children of children have forgotten the details. The river runs. And it remembers. This is what the water carries. This is what the crossing teaches. That the world is always watching. Not with judgment. Not with a list of your failures. With something that has no human name. Something older than judgment. Something that has seen everything that has ever happened near a river and has carried it in its current and remembered. That your small moments are not small. That the morning you stopped when everyone else walked past. That morning is held somewhere. That the hand you extended, the warm, uncertain, uncalculated hand, is held somewhere. That the crossing you made, through cold water, with a warm load and someone else's hand in yours, is held. Everything good you have ever done in the quiet moments. Everything kind. Everything that cost you something, and you paid the cost anyway. The river holds it. The river knows. And maybe, in a season you cannot predict, in a form you will not recognize, the river will come to the bank. It will need help with a heavy thing. And the only question will be, will you stop? When the path is empty and there is no one to see. When you have your own containers to fill. When the crossing looks difficult. Will you stop? Because the ones who stop The ones whose feet move before their minds agree. Those are the ones the river is glad to remember. Be one of those. Every morning, every crossing, every ordinary path. Stop. Help carry. Test every stone. And hold the water all the way home. You are still here. You crossed that river with Sinachi. You stood on the far bank and watched the old woman disappear. You carried the warm water all the way back through the village. You sat in the compound when Mama Chitty drank. You were there for all of it. And that tells me something about you. It tells me that you are the kind of person who stays, who goes the distance, who does not put something down halfway through just because the other bank is still far. That is who this channel was made for. Because what we carry here, these stories, these voices, these ancient fires burning in modern mouths, they are heavy. They are heavy the way important things are heavy. Heavy with truth. Heavy with the memory of grandmothers. Heavy with the kind of wisdom that does not come from books, but from rivers. From crossing. From showing up. From stopping on the path. And we need people like you to help carry them. So here's what I am asking. Hit that subscribe button right now. Not for us. For the stories that are coming. There are so many more stories. Stories of rivers and spirits and grandmothers who knew things, and young people who stopped when the world was walking. Stories that will reach into the old part of you, the part that your great-grandmother built, the part that your ancestors sang into existence, and remind you who you are. Stories that will make you want to stop on your own road, hold your own crossing, carry your own bundle, all the way home. Subscribe now. Like this story if it touched somewhere real in you. And drop a comment, right now, before you scroll away, about a moment when you stopped for someone and you do not know why you stopped, you just did. Tell us, because those moments are sacred, and they belong in this space. We will be here, with the next river, with the next crossing, with the next old woman on the path who is never quite what she seems. We will be here. And now that you have subscribed, so will you. The river knows your name. Come back and let it speak.